Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Untrivial Podcast. My name is Ali Nelson. My guest today is Dr. Sharon Martin. She is a psychotherapist and author specializing in helping adult children recover from difficult childhoods. For the past 25 years, she's been helping individuals overcome self-doubt and shame, embrace their imperfections, and learn to set boundaries. Dr. Martin is the author of the CBT Workbook for Perfectionism and the Better Boundaries Workbook. Today we discuss what perfectionism is, how it can present, how we can overcome the need to be perfect, and so much more. You can connect with Dr. Martin in all the links in the show notes. And now, let's get into the episode. Dr. Sharon Martin, thank you so much for being here today. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I know we've heard a lot about your background and your studies, but for those who don't know you, can you give like a quick overview of what your focus is?
Sure. So I am a psychotherapist by training. So I'm interested in all things related to understanding ourselves and relationships. A lot of the work that I do is around perfectionism and codependency, self-worth. And I think related to that, it's often folks who have struggled with some issues growing up, often people who have had some difficulties in childhood. That can be a variety of different things. And then often what happens is we get to adulthood, and some of the things that we used as coping strategies growing up, they helped us get through some difficult times. We realize in adulthood are no longer serving us so well, and they can actually be getting in the way of us accomplishing the things that we want to accomplish or doing the things that we want to do, having the kind of fulfilling relationships that we're looking for. So perfectionism is one of those things that we can talk about. There's a variety of others, but that's certainly one that comes to mind for me, and it's definitely been something that personally that I have struggled with as well. And I just like to mention that I consider myself a recovering perfectionist, and everything that we're going to talk about is really a combination of things that I have learned through my professional work, whether that's with clients or through studying and research. But it's also what we often called, me search, which is understanding ourselves and that quest to figure out what's going on with us. Why am I doing these things? How can I change them? How can I make this all work better for me? And really, keep the elements that work well and let go of some of the components of perfectionism that are getting in my way and not so helpful anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people can relate to that struggle too. So, I guess before we get into some of the details, how do you define perfectionism?
There's really a couple of different components of perfectionism. So when I think about what does that mean, I'm looking at setting expectations that are impossibly high.
Hmm.
So not just high standards. So this is where we might differentiate between perfectionism and excellence, and remembering that it's excellence is a great goal, but perfectionism is really something that is unattainable. So it's a standard that is impossibly high. So, by definition, we can't ever reach it. So we can, start to imagine how that becomes a problem for us, right? If we're always trying to strive for something that we can never get to, it's not going to be fulfilling for us. And then the other elements are the way that we look at mistakes. So for perfectionists, we think about mistakes and flaws as defining elements of who we are, like their character traits. This is something that defines me as a person rather than it being something that is either a normal part of the learning process, something just a normal part of being a human, or something that is just fleeting, right? We make a
Hmm.
mistake and then we move on. But for the perfectionist, we really can't move on. We will, just ruminate over that and beat ourselves up over it and really feel like this is a huge deal, even if it's really quite a small mistake or problem that we're thinking about. And then, like I was saying already, that next component is the self criticism. And that's really another central piece here is that perfectionists are really hard on themselves, just don't let themselves off the hook. You can see how these elements sort of work together. We have impossibly high standards. We don't think mistakes are ever helpful, and then we're always on our own case about it. And then the other components are the way that we look at achievement. So we'll also think about perfectionists as constantly striving to achieve more, to do more. And that is because at the core, what we're doing is we're defining our self worth according to our achievements. So if I have achieved something great, right, that means that I am a good person, I'm an intelligent person, I'm a worthwhile person. So it's very intertwined rather than having, what I might call sort of a steady or just internal sense of I'm okay. I have, can think highly of myself, even if, this project I did at work was a complete and utter flop, right? Like that doesn't
Right.
define who I am or my value as a person or a worker or a spouse or whatever the scenario might be. And then the final element is there's a lot of fear that's part of perfectionism. And that would be fear of criticism, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of embarrassment, feeling inadequate. And what that does is then we don't want to try new things. We don't want to take risks. What we want to do is just do the things that we already know that we're good at, that we can be
Mhm.
successful at, right? So that we can get the gold star for doing a good job. So that's that sort of play it safe and you'll feel successful. But we miss out on a lot of opportunities either for different sorts of success or learning or growth. I think that that's part of that because, like I said, you're really just limiting your options.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like a lot of people I know who struggle with this, I get the sense that they believe they've always been this way. They've always struggled with perfectionism. Is this something that can or does develop over time? Or are people kind of from early childhood kind of in that state of attaching that worth to achievement and kind of having that belief system already kind of set up?
Yeah, I think like a lot of things when we think about understanding ourselves, there's probably a mix of maybe some innate tendencies towards perfectionism, and I don't think that we've really well defined what that is or, why some people might be more inclined from a very young age in that direction. But I do feel like there is an element of that as well as a learned component. And as I was talking about earlier, we can think about some of our childhood experiences or the way that we were parented, or even maybe the school or the culture or religious teachings, various influence, and even just our culture at large. In Western culture, we can think about a lot of the media images and pressure that we feel that might lead us down this path. So I think there's often that combination that certainly it can be things that we learn and develop to cope with difficult experiences that we're having, but probably there's some of us, that just sort of are naturally inclined, towards perfectionism. And maybe, there's some related components which we probably don't have time to get into a lot of, but I think there's some interesting connections there with people who are very sensitive to emotions and surroundings and things like that as well that may resonate with some people who are listening as well.
Mhm. I guess my question is what leads to, you know, some struggle or some belief about ourselves mapping to I must do everything perfectly. Do you know what I mean? Like what is it
Yeah.
about doing things perfect that is kind of that end result of that initial feeling?
Mm. Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't know that there's a single answer to that. Again, I certainly think about all of the pressure that we feel from outside of ourselves, and maybe we could almost think about it in those 2 boxes, and again, they're not separate, but, the internal pressure that we feel and the external pressure that we feel to be perfect, and of course, right, I mean, the external often becomes the internal, so, that's one way, when I say that they're not separate entities, they're very much connected here. We will internalize a lot of the messaging that we get, whether that's from our parents or from other sources. And it's often there's this sort of this element of if I'm trying to be perfect, it's as if I can try to control something in my life. So if you think about life feeling out of control,
Mm-hmm.
Perfectionism can be one way to try to make it feel like I am in control of at least some of what's going on in my life. I can control myself and I can almost like micromanage myself into perfection that ends up feeling like I've got some sense of control over it. Of course, it doesn't tend to be successful because we're never going to meet those perfectionistic ideals that we have set for ourselves. So it's always a self, defeating, you know, prophecy here. We're always trying to do something that we're never going to attain. So then we end up feeling worse about ourselves. So then we're on that hamster wheel of around and around, right? I'm trying to achieve something, I can't achieve it, so I feel lousy. I feel lousy, so I need to now figure out what else can I do to feel good about myself rather than the alternative would be how can I feel good about myself without needing to achieve something, without somebody else needing to tell me I've done a good job or I've won the award or gotten the promotion. It's really this sort of external validation that we're seeking instead of how can I feel this way inside of myself despite whatever's going on around me. And
Right.
that's a tough ask, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
I think it's easy to understand why we would want to, look for somebody to just tell me, show me some proof, with your words or with that achievement award that I could
Yeah.
get.
It's like you can grab it. It's attainable. Well, you have proof that you are
Yes,
good rather than your own
absolutely.
internal thoughts and feelings about yourself.
Right,
Mhm.
because it's I think that's a great point that you're making, Ellie, because it's like there's an element of a lack of self-trust. It's almost as if your opinion matters more than my opinion of myself,
Mhm.
which in some ways makes no sense at all because and I don't mean really you in particular, but this other person, even if it's somebody who knows you very well, you like your parent or your spouse, they don't know you as well as you know yourself.
Mhm.
And I think that's always the case is that you know yourself better than anybody else. So it almost doesn't make sense to say, oh, this other person needs to, give me, some proof of my
Yeah.
worth. But if you have lived your life feeling unworthy and gotten a lot of messages from people that you are unworthy, then it makes sense that you're going to feel that way no matter what proof you're getting. And I think this is where it also gets very confusing for folks is that sometimes there are perfectionists who do get a lot of external validation. They do have, a wall full of trophies and diplomas and, all of the stuff that is the proof of having achieved a lot in life. But there are also perfectionists who do not get a lot of external validation. Sometimes there are folks who achieve what most people would consider a lot and are very successful, but still have, for example, parents who are telling them it's never enough. You're
Right.
still not good enough. So that's a very confusing message to actually have achieved what looks like a lot of success, but still being told you're not good enough. You're never going to be good enough. Do more. Why didn't you get the A plus plus, on your paper instead of the A?
Yeah. It sounds exhausting to have that level of
Absolutely.
expectation on you.
Absolutely. I think that is very much a part of it is again there's this internal drive that you feel like you have to always be doing something, achieving more, doing more, perfecting something. And it's really difficult for a lot of perfectionists to just relax, enjoy something, have some downtime. Even when they're doing things that look like they're relaxing, they might be thinking about all of the things that they should be doing um,
Mhm.
right? That they are supposed to be doing that are work or productivity, oriented things. And so they will often feel like things that are supposed to just be hobbies or restful, that feels like a waste of time because there's nothing that's being accomplished per se,
Right.
right? Or not something that,
Yeah.
ticks
I
off a box.
Yeah, I think even, when you're mentioning society and all that external messaging that we get, even someone who might not even struggle with perfectionism, it's hard to
Yeah.
just look around you and take in all of that messaging of do more, be more, more success, especially with social media. You're only seeing the most successful of the most successful people oftentimes. And when
Yeah.
you kind of take stock of your life in comparison, it's so easy to feel like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Or I am not achieving anything compared to all these people. Meanwhile, it's not an accurate sample of the general population. It's like the best of the best people online. So I totally understand just being bombarded and feeling like always needing to do more and striving for more and achieving more.
Yeah. I think it's very much a part of our culture. And I do think social media has really exacerbated it. It has, we all know that for sure. I mean, that it's the curated life that we're looking at. And even though we know it, I think it still has an impact on us. That's the ironic thing about it is we know it's not the whole picture or it's false, even in some cases, and yet it still feels like, oh, I want that. It looks so
Exactly.
good. Why can't I achieve it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like it's sort of tricking our brain, I think.
Mm-hmm. Does perfectionism for people who struggle with it, does it show up in all areas of their lives? Have you noticed, or can it be kind of specific to work or specific to a craft?
Yeah, I think it can be almost everywhere. It can feel like it's very pervasive in all areas of one's life, or it can be more specific, like you are saying. So I think that either could be the case for people. And I would say, just in general, we can think of perfectionism on a continuum. So it also might be that it's most problematic at work and you've got some elements of it at home, but they maybe aren't, causing too many difficulties or it's, not as big an issue there. So you might have something like that as well. So absolutely, it's, work is a big place. I mean, home encompasses so much, of course, and
Mm-hmm.
it can, really impact relationships is another area that sometimes people don't think about, but our personal relationships can be impacted as well, just in terms of either, I mean, just because of our behavior. If we are constantly working, we can't be present in our personal relationships, or maybe we're not making time for them. We don't want to, do those fun things that our partner wants to do, or we don't feel like we have time to do the family activities or things like that. The other thing that sometimes can happen is that perfectionists can be really hard on other people as well. So we
Mm.
definitely know that they're hard on themselves and their self-criticism, but there can also be outward criticism. There can be an expectation that those around you are going to be perfect as well. So that can definitely impact relationships in a negative way if you have realistic expectations for your family or your friends, your coworkers,
Mm-hmm.
and that either might be that you're constantly internally frustrated and disappointed and annoyed with them, but we know that often that then starts spilling out into the way that we interact with other people too. So we might not be so nice to other people if we feel like they're not living up to our expectations.
Yeah, it's almost like projecting that perfectionist attitude onto others and being frustrated when people are not in the same space as you. I like how you brought up that it can be specific because I don't consider myself a perfectionist, but then all of a sudden when I started wedding planning, I met a side of myself that I had never seen before, and it was almost like this stressful, really important kind of
Yeah.
moment that held so much weight. It became, something that I cared so much about, and every single detail had to be just
Yeah.
right. And so many people would
Hmm.
tell me, like, it's not going to be a perfect day. It can't be. Something, even if it's
Yeah.
small, might not go to plan. And I was like, not ready to hear it.
They're not having that. Uh-huh.
But I had never really struggled with it outside of that particular planning process, and I didn't know
Hmm.
if that was common.
It's common, and I'm chuckling. I mean, because I think we've all heard of sort of the bridezilla,
Yeah.
kind of scenario, right? I mean, so I mean, it
Mhm.
is a thing, but it also makes a lot of sense when you think about a wedding, because that's something that feels like it's supposed to be one of the most important days of your life. There's so many expectations. It's probably something that you have, thought about for a long time. For not all, but many women really remember that being something that they've thought about since they were little, and,
Right.
maybe playing dress up and pretend, thinking about the beautiful gown and the flowers and the lovely venue. And again, you think about social media and all the beautiful
Right.
images that we see there as well. So I think there's so much expectation about what that day is going to be and what it's supposed to be like and how you're supposed to feel and what you're going to look like, that it's like all of that has gotten funneled into all of that has to be accomplished on this one day.
So would you say perfectionists, is it almost in a way that everything is like a big deal? Maybe not wedding level, but everything needs to go perfectly. Would they apply that same level of rigor to, let's say, a work project?
Yeah, I mean, they would often feel like any endeavor needs to be perfect. So even, even little things like I'm gonna write an email or a text message. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have, I've talked to just about how long it will take them to construct the email, rewrite it, spell check it, again, like spending an inordinate amount of time on something that really is not going to be a big deal in the vast majority of cases. And they have made it into a big deal as if, some big life altering decision or event is going to hinge on this email that they're sending. So, I mean, there's a lot of inefficiency, which again is sort of ironic because, we're always trying to get so much done. We waste a lot of time on perfectionism as well. But I think one of the differences in your example of something very specific like wedding planning is my hunch is that it is that specific day and the expectations about that day for you that is, sort of sparking all of this versus it being an underlying difficulty with self-worth, which is,
Mm,
sort of people who have sort of more pervasive or, perfectionism. I would say that's more common, is that's what's really driving that. And again, I mean, within that, a particular day or event or project might spark something more intense around their perfectionism. But it's my guess is for you is that you'll have the wedding and sort of that will all sort of resolve itself just because the event will be over. And it should be easier, for you because you have this self-awareness that this is what's going on, that you can also probably make some shifts more easily than people that have like real entrenched perfectionism. It's hard for us to even realize that that's what's going on, but when we do, it's still hard to let go of it, right? I mean, I'm thinking that for you, once you've seen this is what's happening, is you can start to work towards embracing the fact that there will be some imperfections in this wedding, and how can you be okay with that? Or maybe how can that even bring something
right.
that's different or fun or meaningful instead of just trying to push away from all of that and say I can't let anything be imperfect,
Right.
but moving towards it instead of against it, with the mindset that it will be okay. I mean, that's, we all know, of course, the whole point is the marriage, right? It's
Right.
not the wedding is the means to the end. That's what we're really trying to achieve.
Yeah. We were talking earlier too about, you know, needing that external validation and getting that messaging either from parents or peers or social media, wherever you get it from. Is perfectionism in a way then tied to people pleasing at all?
Yeah. Absolutely. That's one of those components where there's a huge overlap that I would say that is, I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg, kind of thing here, but it definitely is something that will show up as an element of perfectionism. Is I also want to do things that are going to please you because then you are going to tell me that I am pleasing to you, right? And that's what I'm looking for. Just like you said, there's the validation that I want. So I don't want to do something that's going to upset you or cause an argument or us to have a rift of some kind, because then again, I'm going to feel like, oh my gosh, I've done something wrong. I'm a bad person, or some variation of that that ends up feeling like, right, that's not a perfectionist is in theory, right? I mean, what we're hoping for is that we're easy to get along with. We're low maintenance
Mhm.
people, that we don't cause problems. Unfortunately, again, I think this is an area where sometimes our perfectionism is causing the opposite to happen. If you think about a perfect person, most of us will say, well, that would be somebody who's, really easygoing and, they're agreeable and they don't argue with you about things, all those kinds of things. So absolutely, I think that's where, we're going to definitely tap into that people pleasing element to get some of that external validation.
Yeah. So when we think about maybe trying to unwind this need for perfectionism, or mentioned earlier your self-worth is attached to this external validation, and you're struggling to have this internal sense of self-worth, how do you start kind of decoupling your worth from these achievements or tasks?
Yeah, it's a tough thing to do. I mean, there's obviously no easy answer that we can just, flip the switch, but like so many things, we do need to have awareness that that's what's going on. So that is a place to start, is to just notice that that's what you're doing. If you can notice, okay, I'm looking for somebody to say, good job, or thank you so much for doing all of this work, or whatever that is for you, then, you can stop and say, okay, what if I can do some of that for myself? I think because we're social beings, it's important for us to have relationships with people. We want to remember that our goal isn't ever to never seek external validation, because again, both that would be unrealistic for us as well, but there is a healthy relationship component of when you're in a close, relationship with somebody, that their opinion does matter to you. So I
Hmm.
don't want people to go away feeling like I should never look for external validation. It's just that we want to keep it in perspective. Like that should be an element that helps us feel good about ourselves, but it shouldn't be the main event. Right?
Right.
The main event needs to be, I need to feel good about myself even when my husband is angry with me, or even when I have made a big mistake at work, that I can still feel like I'm an okay person. So that I want to, remain stable. So anyway, we should know whose opinion matters to us and how important it is. But remember that your own opinion is the most important opinion here. So what we want to do is also start to cultivate some of that within ourselves by intentionally giving ourselves internal validation. And this feels very awkward and just, strange for most people if it's not something you've ever done.
Hmm.
And if you haven't gotten a lot of positive, warm affirmations from other people who are in close personal relationships with you, if you got a lot of that, it's easier to give it to yourself.
Right. If you've never done that, what does
Yeah.
that look like?
Well, I mean, one way that people often find helpful and pretty straightforward is to think about the way that you talk to other people. Like, how do you express warmth or empathy, kindness to other people? What are some of the words that you use, or maybe even what are some of the actions that you do? And really thinking about, how could I give the same thing to myself?
Yeah, that self-love.
Yeah, it's really not very different, and this is what I often tell people, is that if you know how to care for, love, have friendships, be attentive to other people, it's really the same skill set. It just feels weird in the beginning, but it's really just because you're not used to doing it. It's not because you're doing it wrong. So the more that you do it, the more comfortable it starts to feel.
Hmm.
But again, I mean, sometimes the almost the most challenging element is realizing that either that you need some self-compassion or that you deserve some self-compassion. Because so often we're not even tuned into, hey, this is really difficult. I'm struggling with something, right? Because again, that doesn't feel like something a perfectionist wants to tune into, right? We really
Right.
want to just, either, stay focused on the goal that's ahead of us so that we can persevere with that, or pretend like it's not a struggle.
Hmm.
There's this real basic human element of I'm having a hard time right now. And we all know, again, from the way we relate to other people, is when somebody's having a hard time, being kind to them, offering them, something that's comforting helps them, right? It helps you to feel loved and cared about, but it also can help you to be motivated as well. So that's an element where perfectionists will often feel like, oh, that's just, going to slow me down, right? That's sort of like this unnecessary fluff or whatever. But really the compassion, and this very well researched actually, can really help people be more productive and get more things done. So not only is it about feeling better about yourself, but it really can help you to meet achievable, important goals as well.
Yeah. My friend, he and I did an episode as well. His name's Matt Rakelboom, but he always says, treat your mental health like it's your best friend that you love. That kindness, that empathy, that encouragement. You're not gonna rag on someone who's having a tough day the way some people talk to themselves internally when they're having a tough day. And it's how do you kind of flip that switch and be a little bit gentler? Do you ever do, I love like affirmations. There's definitely like podcasts that kind of go over either self-love affirmations or wellness affirmations. Do
Yeah.
you ever recommend those or do those yourself?
Oh yeah. I like a good affirmation too. And I've written quite a few. I've got a variety that are on my website, and so forth. I have some even that are specifically for perfectionism. But anyway, I mean, I do think they're great. What I will say is that it's important that you find the right affirmation, something that just resonates with you or that you can tweak a little bit so that it feels true, because sometimes you will get some affirmations that just feel like they're so unbelievable that they're not going to be effective. So that's what I would say is like when you're looking at affirmations or writing some for yourself, is make sure that they feel like they ring true for you. I mean, this wouldn't be the affirmation we'd be going for here, but if you're just, finding an affirmation that says, I'm the best person in the world, then I'm, so successful, and you're just feeling like a horrible, terrible person, like saying that is not going to be helpful to you because it just doesn't feel like it's true. So sometimes I will also suggest that you can add in a word like I'm trying to, or I'm learning how to some affirmations, depending what they are, to make them, again, feel like, okay, this is something I'm working on. But it definitely reinforces the way that you want to be thinking and feeling about yourself. So it can definitely be helpful, I think.
Mm-hmm. What about when you're in the midst of maybe writing that email for the fourth time and
Right.
you maybe come up on, oh, is my perfectionism kind of rearing its head? How do we get out of five more edits? Is there like a
Yes.
framework that you have when you're kind of in motion perfecting something?
Well, those kinds of scenarios, one thing that we can think about is it's almost like a sort of a type of exposure therapy that we can do for ourselves.
Okay.
And again, this is tough. It's tough, but it does work if you can get yourself to do it in baby steps. And the idea is basically that you're going to intentionally let something be imperfect
Mm,
or leave something undone. And it's going to be painful. That's why it's important that you start with something that's small, that it's not truly a really, big deal, or it feels like a really big deal to you. So again, you might even think of this email scenario, think, well, who am I sending this email to? Is this the most important person at this company that I'm trying to get, a job at? Okay, that email might be pretty important.
yeah.
But if am I trying to, craft an email to my doctor asking for a prescription refill? Like this does not need to be perfect. Right. I mean, so if we can tune into something that is genuinely pretty low stakes and then challenge ourselves to not do spell check, send the first draft, something along those lines. Another example I will sometimes tell people, because this seems to be pretty common, is people who feel like they absolutely must have the kitchen 100% clean before they go to bed, is leave a one dirty dish in the sink. see if you can do it right. That we're really building up the tolerance for the mistake or the mess or the flaw with the idea that the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get with it. And what I want to remind people is that the fear here is that it's like a slippery slope. And I'm going to just like, if I start doing this, I'm going to let everything go. And before I know it, the kitchen is going to be a complete and utter mess and my life will be out of control.
Yeah.
I'll
The
tell you,
house
for
in
those
total will be in
right,
shambles.
my life will fall apart, right? I mean, yeah, we go there really quick, but the truth is for those of us that really struggle with perfectionism is that very, very, very unlikely to happen. I mean, both because we're not gonna get there that quickly, that we're gonna go from, A to Z here in these scenarios, and the other thing is that, we can be very intentional about these kinds of things, and so, like I said, we're deciding what are the things that really matter the most, whether that's what relationships, how we want to spend our time, how we want to spend our money, our values. So when we're really putting our effort into the things that matter the most, then we can let go of the things that we know truly are not that important to us, right? And that's really where there's a lot of freedom is I'm choosing to have excellence, have high standards on certain things because those matter to me, but not everything needs that same level of intensity or
That
focus
rigor.
that yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What if someone's listening and is like, well, how do I know if the difference between perfectionism and excellence? Like, what if I just want to be excellent? Wouldn't that also be a really great email? Or wouldn't that also be a super clean kitchen? What do you say to questions like that?
Well, I think part of that distinction would be something could be excellent, but still have a small error in it. Like you think about like I could read an excellent novel and there could be a typo in it.
Hmm.
And I would still notice, but I would still think that was an excellent book. So I think there's a little bit more of the give and take. There's a little bit more tolerance for some small errors. And I'm not going to, be so hard on myself if I'm the one who was responsible for the typo, right? That I would say that doesn't take away everything that's good about this because there's one small mistake in it where I think the perfectionist, it's really all or nothing. It's
Hmm.
either perfect or it's imperfect. And so much of life is really in the middle ground,
Yeah.
so we can stay pretty close to that high end, right, with our standards of excellence, at least in some scenarios where they're warranted. But the reality is there are other things that don't need excellence even. They can really just be adequate
Hmm.
and if we can get there with the things that warrant that, I mean, we can just save ourselves so much mental energy and anguish and wasted time and wasted money putting in the time and effort on things that are of little consequence. Reminds me that sometimes people will say or ask themselves a question like, will this matter a month from now or a year from now? And those kinds of questions can be helpful in some of these situations. Again, to just put it in perspective is like, how important is this? Right? Everything feels really important right now because it's happening right now, but a lot of things.
Yeah, that's helpful. Will it matter in 5 minutes? Will it matter in 5 years? No.
Right. 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 Yeah.
Definitely.
And I think a lot of that reminds me of just parenting issues and things that feel like
Yeah.
they're really important with your kids. But again, you have to make some choices about what are the things that really the matter the most. But if Johnny doesn't eat all of his breakfast today or wears his, dirty shoes to church or whatever it is, you think, I mean, like, is that going to matter a year from now? Probably not. So maybe that's not something we need to have, be so perfectionistic about.
And it's just a matter of knowing like every single thing. I don't even think can be perfect. Not everything can be high priority that can
Right.
have all of your mental energy all the time. Like it just sounds exhausting to attempt that. My goodness.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, I mean, you're expending so much energy on this stuff, but you're not really getting anywhere with a lot of it, right? Because, well, you might be accomplishing things, but they're not things that matter necessarily.
But there's obviously, lots of things that do matter too, right? Like,
Yes,
if
of
it's
course.
school, if it's academic achievement, if it's work achievement, then probably a lot of success comes with that, financial success comes with that. So I definitely think there's a positive side to some of it if it's in the right areas, right? But I think, being in that excellent state rather than almost going so
Right.
far that you burn yourself out or something, right?
Right, right. We can definitely think about there are elements of perfectionism that can be helpful. And, those are the things that people are really talking about when they actually are saying perfectionism is a good thing, is they're really just talking about certain elements of it. So things like being detail oriented or being punctual or having high standards, being disciplined, having goals, all those kinds of things are really good and important traits that can be very helpful, especially in certain types of work. I remember one time I had a client who was a pharmacist, and she was talking about, I mean, in her work, she really did need to be perfect or as close to it as she could because the work really demanded it. So there are certain professions or tasks that we are more important, right? If you will. But I think as long as we can make that distinction and say, okay, I'm not doing that now. So I can try to dial back some of that and realize that this isn't a place where I need that kind of focus or that kind of attention to the minutia of it.
My mind goes to like a surgeon where you would want perfectionism on the operating table, but maybe in his personal life when he's, scheduling a dinner,
Yeah.
it doesn't need
Yeah.
to be,
I
you know.
think, right. I think those are really tough questions, thinking about those kinds of professions. And there are some others that come to mind as well, because even a surgeon, we certainly know, I mean, they do make mistakes, and sometimes they're life or death mistakes, not always. But I mean, for folks who are working in that kind of medical profession or pilots, or I mean, again, there's lots of other things where their choices really do have important consequences. At the same time that we want to strive for excellence or as few mistakes as we can, we also have to deal with the reality that people are humans and they are
Yeah.
going to make mistakes. And, how do we respond to that? Either other people or ourselves if we're the person who is the surgeon who makes a mistake. Because again, I think at the end of the day, just being critical and just thinking like you're the worst person ever because of that is not going to actually help anybody.
Yeah. What about, so we're talking a little bit about, how to kind of stop it in the moment or frameworks around not doing things so perfect. What about times when, say, we've done something and we've been given that, maybe it's not a gold star, maybe it's a silver star, maybe it's a bronze
Mhm.
star. What do we do when we have something happen that doesn't quite meet the level we were achieving for, and how do we handle not feeling so bad about ourselves for maybe not being perfect?
Yeah. Well, I think we could think about what we have achieved rather
Mm,
than what we haven't achieved. I mean, that question really makes me think about Olympic athletes or maybe athletes in general. But, there was a lot more discussion, I think, amongst the Olympic athletes and their mental health and thinking about the impact of all of that pressure and how that negatively impacts one's mental health. And again, I mean, you're just sort of imagining what that would be like to be working so hard, training so hard. And again, I mean, really striving for perfection in what they are trying to do, and then feeling like you have fallen short of the number one position. And yet they have already achieved so much more than like 99.999% of
right.
the population, right? By even getting to the Olympics or, getting a bronze or a silver medal is still a huge accomplishment. So if we can try to change the way that we think about that, almost, cup is half empty, cup is half full kind of shifting in our mind to thinking about all that has been gained, all that has been accomplished. And beyond that, I think we could stretch even further, to think about what is the purpose of this endeavor beyond the medal, the degree, the gold star, the whatever is that outward symbol that you are the best or have achieved something great here is why else are you doing it? I mean, is that the only reason? If we dig deeper, I think there's more to it. That's the most obvious, answer, right? Is for, the fame and fortune and gold medals. But I suspect there's other reasons that it is important to people to strive to achieve great
Hmm.
things in those regards.
Yeah, and I think when we're taking it out of the context of Olympic athletes and just regular people, there's plenty of reasons why we do what we do and the meaning behind that, what it provides to the world, what like all the
Yep.
different reasons you would pursue any profession um
Yeah,
that have nothing to
absolutely.
do
Right.
with your, status per se.
Yeah, yeah, I'm thinking, I mean, right, you start a new podcast and, maybe, there's some awards or a certain number of reviews or great things that one can achieve, but that's probably not the only reason, that you start a
Mhm.
podcast, right? I mean,
Right. You want to have
again, there's
cool
a lot of other.
conversations.
Right, meet interesting people, learn new things, share
Exactly.
certain, information with other people, all kinds of things. And again, I think if we really think about any goal that we are endeavoring to achieve, is it's more than the outcome. There's a lot of good stuff, sometimes even more good stuff that's in the process of getting there. So that's another great reminder for people is to try to not only think about the outcome of what they're doing, but the process and try to either enjoy the process or be aware of what they're getting from the process in addition to what might be the outcome.
Yeah. What about for, say, you're not a perfectionist, you're a friend or family member or spouse of someone who is? Are there any things that we could do to support someone in our life who maybe is struggling with perfectionism, or does that work have to come from within?
Well, I think the answer might depend on where they are in terms of their awareness and their interest in change. If it's
Mm,
somebody who has made you aware that this is something that they're struggling with and they really are trying to make some changes in this area, then you could very specifically ask them, what could I do to be supportive of you in this area and take your cues from them. I think it's a little bit harder if you have somebody where you're seeing the problem, but they're not really seeing the problem or
right.
they're not really ready to do something about it. I mean, I think if that's the case, probably your best bet is really going to just try to be compassionate, try to be understanding. Certainly, if they're doing something that is causing harm to you, to gently hold them accountable and let them know that that's certainly appropriate and often really helpful for people, even if they don't realize it at the moment. But it shouldn't be, a free pass for perfectionists to yell at you and treat you poorly. Again, I think it's just going to depend on where they're at with it. But even if they're not interested in doing something about it, sometimes it can just be helpful for us to see what's going on, and then it's almost like you can sort of see them in a different light, and I think it can help us to be more compassionate to say, "Oh, I think that's some of their perfectionism that's coming out, and I'm sure that there's a good reason why they're behaving that way, but if you can understand, oh, something like, "That's probably because they actually don't feel very good about themselves," is, a different way of looking at the person just thinking, "This guy's a total jerk." There's other things that work for people.
Yeah. And I think that's so true even in outside of the perfectionism context, but in any context, like everyone's got something, everyone's going through something. Compassion can go so far and great when you know kind of the driving force, but even if you don't, like we can all just be a little bit nicer to each other for sure. If people could take away a message from you, your page, your insights, what would you want to leave them with?
There's so many different things I think that are all important. I mean, I really think this message of self-compassion is a really important one that we've been talking about. So I hope that people will take that certainly around perfectionism, but just in general, that being hard on yourself is usually not going to make things better for you. It's not going to get you to where you want to be. So if we can try to be a bit kinder to ourselves, I think that we are going to actually not only feel better, but be able to do more of the things that we want in the world. So I think that's a great one. I think also if we just think about try to understand ourselves. I mean, there's that element of compassion. I think that is important there as well. Like I was saying, is trying to understand sort of the problem behaviors, if you will. I mean, that's probably not the greatest term for them, but just sort of generally speaking, the things that we're doing that we're not so happy with, or that don't really work so well for us, but trying to see that those have their roots in something that was at one time helpful for us. Like we developed these behaviors because they were the best thing that we could figure out how to do often when we were kids. And now that we're adults, we can try to learn something that's better. But again, to try and to not beat ourselves over, the things that we learned that were adaptive when we learned them and did
Hmm.
have a purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Last question. Where can people find you, get connected, and learn more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. My website is livewellwithsharonmartin.com. So that's where I've got all of my blog posts. I've got lots of articles there and various freebies and other things. And then my book, the CBT Workbook Perfectionism, should be available from most bookstores.
Amazing. Dr. Sharon Martin, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Allie.